Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good break, got some coffee. As I already mentioned during the question, I'm Alex Riebl. I'm from the United Nations Department of Safety and Security, and I work there in the physical security section. Thank you very much to you, Rob, also from my side for the introduction this morning. I think it was already a good discussion, and I will reflect a little bit from a UN as a end user perspective in relation to the threat that we face in the field. But I'm very glad that I'm actually presenting as a second presenter, because it already gave some very good impulse for specific topics. And I'm even more glad that I present also early, because I will also ask a lot of questions to this auditorium, and I hope some of you can answer them during your presentations. I mentioned I'm in New York in the UN headquarters in the DSS physical security section. This physical security section was actually created not too long ago, and we are responsible to provide the whole UN system with expertise in regard to physical security. I think this is important to understand, that we are responsible for the whole UN system, and we talk about the UN system, and that's why I just show you this overview what the UN system is. And when we see the yellow part, we talk about the Secretariat. And the Secretariat will mainly be supported by the procurement division when it goes into the process for acquiring armored vehicle solutions. But the UN is much more. This whole system of different UN entities, agencies, funds, and programs is a very diverse end-user community, and they all name themselves as United Nations. But I will also go a little bit into the detail what the differences are when I talk about the threat. I think it is also a big achievement by Rob as the host, that our little community here is growing also on the UN side with more different participants. And it is necessary that also different UN entities have their different requirements, and therefore also different procurement processes. Coming back to my team, and I said physical security team. I'm not the expert for armored vehicles in the United Nations. Our physical security section provides expertise in regard to physical security with the main focus on UN premises. This is our daily job. This is what we do. And to do this, we have a small team, an engineer, a security coordination officer, 2 blast engineers, and fire expert, because we include also fire safety, and an assistant. The 2 blast engineers, Desio Leao and myself, our background is military and police. I'm former German ammunition technical officer. Desio is a Brazilian police bomb squad leader. And we come from that side to cover the expertise from blast, and with a focus on the threats that we face. So what we normally do is assessments of UN premises, physical security for all UN entities. So for the whole system that you saw, we are a service provider inside of the UN system to all other UN entities that can reach out to us when they don't have this expertise in-house. And I can mention it, I think there's only one other entity with my colleague Imad, UNHCR, who has this in-house capacity, and all the others are dependent on the few experts that we have. But I don't want to go into detail of premises security here. But what we also do is we provide technical advice for agencies, funds, and programs. And we also provide technical advice for procurement services in the United Nations when it comes to specifications. That's why I'm here, because I also want to learn. And that's why I'm very happy to hear all this technical information from the different specialists and experts like we heard about class. Thank you very much. But we also provide expertise and advice for the drafting process of UN policies and guidelines, and also produce information sheets for other UN entities that they can use, where we try to capture the information that we collect in events like here, and also the information in regard to the threat and requirements that we try to collect from the field. Normally, physical security means for us perimeter protection, blast protection, access control, electronic security, and fire safety. I show this only to explain to you that everything that we do, that I do in regard to armored vehicles, is only a side task. It is something that I do based on request, and I try to attend these events to keep myself updated, but it is not my main focus. I'm a blast engineer. My background is I come from German maintenance in the military. I'm an electronic engineer and studied later explosive ordnance engineering with a focus on blast protection. This leads me to this little video I want to show, because Rob and Yoni asked me to talk a little bit about the basics in regard to blast, and this video is here in a loop, and I just used this to show some of the effects. And when we talk about effects from a blast, and I focus here only on the blast, we have normally heat, overpressure, the impact, and fragments. Some of you are much better experts in that regard when it comes to vehicle protection. And when it comes to our requirements from the field, it is very important to take these explosion effects into account. I discussed again with Imad, many of our own staff in the field thinks when you are inside of an armored vehicle, you are protected. It is proof, as you said, but it is not. And for us, it is actually very important from the different effects to design what level of protection we want. And we take this into account, and luckily we have these different guidelines and standards and protocols that already incorporate most of these effects, especially when it comes to the blast, the overpressure, and the fragments. So how is our normal process? And I try to adapt a little bit the process that we use for the protection of premises, and see how does it fit in regard to vehicles. And on the right side, you see the normal threat matrix that we use in the United Nations for our process. And it comprises the likelihood of an event and the impact of an event. And I want to show this only quickly because I have some examples then later that refer to this. And we cannot protect, when we have an armored vehicle in mind, ourselves from an airdrop bomb or from a large IED with 200 kilograms of explosives. That would be something with a very high critical impact, but hopefully, because of other measures I will explain, not very likely. But what it will cause normally, any event involving explosives in regard to vehicles, is death and injury. And this is what we want to avoid by using armored vehicles. In this case, we normally accept the material and structural damage, and also the disruption of activities, which can mean that when there are specific threats, IEDs or mines in an area, that we cannot go there. And this is something that comes then from the security side, where we can actually restrict or make certain requirements for other UN entities if they want to go into these areas, like using certain type of armored vehicles. We divide our blast protection methodology in two parts. I think that is standard in prevention and mitigation. The whole part of prevention here on the left side, security information in regard to perimeter protection, access control, doesn't really apply to armored vehicles. It applies in a way that we have TTPs in place, and that we do assessments of roads and areas where we go with our armored vehicles. But what is more important is the right side, the blast mitigation. And I think here I saw and identified many similarities when we compare UN premises and armored vehicles. And we have standoff, shielding, and strengthening. We always sell these three components as the most important ones we have to take into consideration when it comes to blast mitigation. And I think the same applies to a certain extent also to armored vehicles. So what is the first step? And this is also the first step when it comes to drafting specifications, is our blast threat assessment. And this is based on past incidents, additional sources of information that we try to collect. And coming to the UN system with a military background, I have to admit that very often in the UN system, also because we are so split up and we don't have the resources and the means, the threat information is often much less specific and not as good as I saw it in the past in the military. But still, the UN has a very organized, and there I was surprised myself, system, the SRM, that creates a certain threat level for specific areas. At one point, it comes to us or someone like me, an expert, and we want to define something. And we ask these questions, how did this explosive threat, here I'm very generic, it can be everything, came it to exist? What is it? And normally, because I'm an engineer, I want numbers, so I want specific amounts, so the size of this threat. And this is then again very important for you. And also, where is it placed? And where is it placed, when I was thinking about it, is now a difficult question in regard to vehicles. I will come back to that in a minute. I want to jump back a little bit to the effects, but now you saw the basic methodology that the UN uses and that we also want to use for our vehicles. I think all of us know, when we talk about blast and fragmentation, distance is our best protection. And because first, the density of the fragments gets lower with the distance. We see on the right side this cube root scale. And when we put this, we can say, when we double the distance, we have the cube root less of the fragments. What does it mean now for our actions and our requirements? Normally we try, okay, we want to have standoff. Standoff is something that is very easy when we talk about premises, because we are in charge, and to a certain extent we can influence this. So we want that our personnel has the highest distance possible from a blast event, and this will either minimize the effects, or it will, if someone is close to an explosion, limit the number of affected people. So when we talk about standoff and premises, we have then our external perimeter wall, we have a horizontal standoff and can do good calculations. But what comes when we see a vehicle? We do not have anything like this. So the standoff is minimal. And this comes then right to the question that we hopefully will discuss. What is our requirement in the specifications in regard to standoff? Where should my charge that I use for my tests be placed? And I will come back to this with some examples from the threat that we face. But because the vehicle is moving, we always have the possibility that the standoff is nearly zero when we have the threat right under the vehicle. And I will also show an example of standoff zero, because I hope, at least in most cases, we have at least these 25, 30 centimeters underneath the vehicle, at least. We have also, we have to take into account that a vehicle is moving. And also, referring to my military background, now we can talk also about active electronic countermeasures. We possibly want to initiate an IAD or avoid the initiation, or this is not really applicable to our civilian environment in the United Nations for this type of vehicles. So we have to assume that the detonation takes place at a very, very short distance. Coming back to the blast threat assessment, and for this, when I want to describe and reflect a little bit about the threat that we face in the field, we have the delivery method of the explosive device. For us, it is very important to have the explosive amount. And whenever I talk here, it's about TNT equivalents, even knowing that most of these threats are not TNT, but possibly homemade explosives, and the likely point of detonation. Here, the likely point of detonation is a typical expression from our premises approach. This doesn't really apply to the vehicle, but I also want to come back to that, because for the vehicle, we also have in our test setting a very defined point of detonation. So how does it look? From what we face for vehicles, what would be a possible threat? And this is again the delivery method, and this is maybe something that is placed or something that is projected against our vehicles. I exclude everything that is a ballistic threat by small arms fire. I talk here only about an explosive event. What we could do, again, comparing with the military, level up. I say I want to provide the best protection for our staff in the field, then we would have to drive around in these vehicles. We cannot do that because we have a task, we have a mission, and we also have a different mindset of people. And we also want to have a different face to the outside, because we are not in a military setting and we don't want to be this. So we have to forget about this. So it is not always possible to go to the highest level, only because I want to provide the best protection. So we have to find a middle ground. When we talk about a threat that is placed, so on the road underneath of the vehicle, we see all types of landmines, and I use landmines because these are at least defined in regard to the amount of explosives, what we see in a certain area. When we talk about IEDs, it is much more difficult to specify a specific amount of explosives that we can see. Examples of thrown ordnance items, yes, grenades in all types. Now it comes. We talk about hand grenades, but also improvised grenades. And this, I think, fits very nicely to the test requirements. I want to go a little bit more into detail in regard to the threat that we face, also with some examples, and then come back. And again, I also want to describe to you the problematic we face when we are going into the process to write specifications. So here on the right side, you see a blast threat assessment that I would love to see from the field, because I need to collect it. And if I have this detail of information, I can write very, very good specifications. For example, we face anti-vehicle mines, a specific type, PRBM M3, which is an anti-vehicle mine, or victim-operated IEDs with a certain amount of explosives positioned on the road at the side or in the middle. That would be great. But what we get normally is we have mines and IEDs used against UN vehicles. So it is very difficult for us to compile specific threat information, especially again because I'm an engineer. In the end, I want to do calculations and I have to put a number into our specifications. So this applies to all the other examples too. What we often get is here the left side from the field, and what we would like to have are numbers like here on the right side. A little bit statistics of what happened, and I actually changed my presentation because it's very, very up-to-date information that was released on 20th of September 2023, the Secretary General report on safety and security of humanitarian personnel and protection of United Nations personnel. I highlighted here these numbers so that you can read it a little bit better in regard attacks on UN vehicles. And in 2022, for example, there were 28 reports of attacks on United Nations premises and 105 attacks on United Nations vehicles. So this shows, because for sure a vehicle is an easier target than premises. There is a high threat for UN vehicles, and it is very important to take this into account. These are the same numbers here, just graphically, and you can see over the last years how the numbers developed. For sure, it is very difficult to interpret this, because it just says in general attack. And unfortunately, we cannot go into detail what was an explosive attack where an ordnance item was used. I'm working on this to get a little bit more information through our system, but I think that is quite a challenge. What is visible from this the graph is that it is a constantly high number. Because we are not only operating in the field and implementing as the UN alone. Here are also the numbers of security incidents affecting implementing partners. Implementing partners can be contractors, can be NGOs supporting the United Nations. And you see here the numbers are even higher, much higher, because this is the higher presence. And I also learned and saw that often access to high-risk areas, we have restrictions. There are areas where we do not allow UN staff, but we allow our implementing partners to go there to deliver on behalf of the United Nations. And this exposes them to an even higher threat. And more or less the moral responsibility from the United Nations requires also that we ensure an acceptable level of protection for them. And in the end, it always comes back to money, because when sometimes I see it is not always perfect that we accept that people without the adequate protection go into this high-risk area. So here we see in 2022, because this is the whole year, 310 armed attacks on vehicles. So I put together a few pictures, and first to give you an overview. And this is from a recent visit to Afghanistan. And just to show you that, have in mind the system chart from the United Nations. We have so many different agencies, in this case, all in the same compound, and all have different armored vehicles, different types. But I want to show you these vehicles. They also have a different marking and appearance. And this is because they have to show who they are, because they have a different mission. And sometimes I don't like this, but we say on this photo, you can see is on this collection the black UN and the blue UN, which is the mission or which is agencies or humanitarian activities, but we are all UN. But some of them have different requirements and therefore also a different type of details in their specifications for the armored vehicles, because first their task, their objective is different. They also have a different requirement based on what they want to do in the field, based on where they want to go, but also the financial resources are sometimes different that they can afford. So even when we talk about this whole UN system, and we all call ourselves United Nations, keep in mind there are UN entities that have a different requirement in regard to the specifications. A little jump into the threat that we face, and a lot of the information I show now is based from the United Nations Mine Action Service, because that is also my former UN organization where I worked, and they are pretty good in collecting the information. We collect this for sure worldwide, and I show only this short snapshot from Africa, because first this is one of the regions where we currently face one of the highest threats, also for vehicles. And it is also a little bit focused on peacekeepers. But I have to say, I was thinking, why do we have more information from peacekeeping operations? And my conclusion was very simple, because we have a better reporting system and we also have a better exploitation system. And I remember that was my own question a year ago. Do we have any collection of information after the incidents? What happened with the armored vehicles? And no, there's nothing in place, at least nothing centrally. But at least for peace operations, we have a military exploitation chain where more information is collected. So I included here a few pictures to describe the actual threat. And when we look into the threat from West Africa, Mali and the surrounding countries, we see that we have there a main focus on improvised explosive devices. And you will see this differs a little bit, and it also changed over time, where right after the conflict we saw a lot of IEDs made with military ordnance, which was easily available, a lot from Libya, but also because the whole area has a huge commercial mining activity. There's a large availability of commercial explosives coming from mining activities. So why, I think, is this important for us here? Even when we have a lot of ammonium nitrate and UNFO-based improvised explosive devices, it is easy to say, and I think rightfully to say, that the amount of explosives that is used here is higher than what we have in our standards. The average weight of the main charge of an IED in West Africa is higher than an anti-tank mine. And why is this the case? Also because we have a large presence of military-grade vehicles from military peacekeepers, and for sure, when they have the better protection, the reaction is to increase the weight of the charge, which is a problem for us with our armored vehicles. When we look a little bit more to the eastern side, and in MINUSCA, we saw in the last years an increase in the threat. We have landmines and IEDs. I think in the whole area we can say, because landmines are easily available, either from the dispersion from stockpiles, from other crises, but also from minefields that can be used and reused. And I want to underline here one example where we found this anti-tank landmine, the PRB-M3, and it has an amount of about 6 kilograms of high explosives. There are several studies specifically about this mine from Small Arms Survey, where they all come from, but the conclusion is this is a type of mine that is currently widely available in West and East Africa and easy to use. And I think from the amount of explosives in the main charge, something that we should keep in mind and in consideration, which is not always taken into account. Not far away in MONUSCO in Congo, we also have seen an evolution in the IED threat. Here we have not seen too many anti-tank landmines. It is also, luckily, compared with different evolutions that we saw in Afghanistan, all the IEDs that we found so far are not very sophisticated, but all, and I did some exploitation. Luckily, we are in a position that also many of them did not function as planned. So I mentioned this also because I will reference this in an example. When we look into one of the hotspot on the west side of Africa, ATMIS, the African Union mission, that is also drawing down until the end of next year. We have seen an upward trend in the IED use, especially now after the ATMIS force is reduced. The Somalian security forces are taking over responsibility. This more or less led to another spike. This is very important for us to understand, because it was, for me, very surprising, the situation in Afghanistan. When all the Western military left Afghanistan, the UN presence actually increased, and we gained access to many areas that were inaccessible before, exposing for sure our staff and our vehicles to new areas where we haven't been before and to new threats. Luckily, we can say when this big target, the military, is gone, and because we are in these areas with a very positive objective, I think we are not the main target, but we are still facing the threat, the legacy threat that is existent in that area. In the area of Somalia, we see also very specific type of IEDs with a very specific mixture of homemade explosives. But there, the biggest threat comes from large vehicle-borne IEDs. And in preparation, I was reflecting myself a little bit, what does this mean for armored vehicles? Vehicle-borne IEDs are commonly used against premises, but they are also used quite a lot to target convoys and other vehicles. And here comes back to me, what is the standoff? And I remember a few examples where then the vehicle-borne IED is actually crashed into a vehicle to have the highest effect. And so this is also standoff 0. Somalia, in looking into Africa, is also so far the only area where I can confirm that specific focused fragmentation charges, not really explosively formed projectiles, were used, but they were found in that area, so they are definitely also a threat. Luckily, not a high threat so far for our civilian vehicles. Break. Now I switch to a few examples of actually 3 incidents that I want to highlight and I want to use to refer what I said before. This is and please understand, I will not mention any details of which UN entity, what happened in detail, who was injured. It is more the focus on the vehicle and the threat that we see. The first example is a ballistic threat. And we have this vehicle that I was able to see and take photographs, that was actually shot at with small arms fire. In total, this vehicle received 9 bullets at different locations. And comparing this with what we saw yesterday and what you said, yes, for sure, they aimed directly at the person, at the driver of the vehicle. And luckily, this is a very positive case, because here the vehicle could continue, could drive, speed off, and arrived in the base safely without any injury. And when I looked at different points of impact, I thought, oh, maybe they also looked at the VPAM standard, because for sure they didn't aim, but they hit exactly these spots in between. I didn't have a lot of time, but I tried also to always inspect the inside to confirm there was no penetration, which was in this case the case. But you can see a vehicle here. It was a small convoy trying to drive off with high speed, could still receive 9 bullets at different points of the vehicle. Here it was also possible easily to collect some of the bullets, I was told, and it was confirmed this was the normal AK-47 round. For me, interesting also these impacts at the hood, and none of them went through to the inner part. Coming to now going back, positive example for me. That was an armored vehicle that actually faced the threat that it was designed for, and it fulfilled its purpose. All the occupants of the vehicle survived. For sure, there's some effect by this. Next example, also from Afghanistan, and this is what I mentioned before. Here we have zero standoff. This was an incident where an explosive charge was placed on the top of the vehicle. In the middle of the traffic, the vehicle had to be slow, and an explosive charge was placed on top. And this killed one passenger of the vehicle who was sitting directly underneath. And this is the other example. None of these vehicles, even this was a VR7 vehicle, I don't want to tell any details, but for sure, none of our armored vehicles that we use is designed for this threat of an explosive charge of several kilograms placed on top. And so this was not surprising. This is from the inside. We could actually say that we are lucky that all the other 3 occupants survived here. It was for sure very interesting for me. There were a lot of speculations what charge was actually used. There were also a lot of discussions what can be done against this, but this was a single event so far. And we saw in the past in Afghanistan a lot the magnetically attached IEDs where small pipe bomb size IED was attached underneath. We also saw IEDs placed in the ground underneath the vehicle, but none of them have been of this size and with distance 0 on top. So another example, we have to remind ourselves, our own staff, that when you are in an armored vehicle, you are not 100% protected against all types of threats. The next question that comes to us, and that was quite difficult to answer, okay, what is the SOP? How should we react to these incidents? Are there any technical possibilities? And then there were these discussions, what can we do to avoid magnets to attach to our vehicles? In this case, because it was immediate initiation after the placement, none of this would have helped. Another example, and the third one I want to close with a good example, was from end of last year in Yemen. And here, one of the vehicles of a UN mission convoy in Yemen drove on a mine, on a landmine. And in this case, it was also, I can say, even when I don't want to go into details, and there were a lot of speculations because it was from the damage more than an anti-personnel mine, but it was possibly, surprisingly, not the damage that we would see from a full anti-tank mine. And I can say here also the purpose of the armored vehicle fulfilled the intent. None of the occupants was actually severely injured or killed. And it makes sure, or it makes very obvious that not only the armor of the vehicle itself is important, but in this case, where there was a former minefield, also the procedures, what happens afterwards, access to the people, how to get out of the armored car, is very important to us. That could be another discussion that will for sure come later in the next 2 days. To summarize, I want to bring up here 3 key points. We have a requirement to operate in these high threat areas. I try to describe a little bit the level of threat. Sometimes the threat level is higher than what we have defined in our specifications. And we either must accept this, but we must be aware, or it can limit our operations. The United Nations is not the United Nations, and we all follow the same procedures. We are luckily, I think I can see a trend that we work closer together. This is very good. We coordinate between each other. We can even use existing contracts from other organizations, but because of the different objective different UN entities have, I think we will still in the future always have different contracts, and the specifications can be different based on the task of the different UN organization. The current main threat, and I want to just highlight this, I have not mentioned this. Most UN staff members injured in cars are from accidents. So I know we discussed this also in the past last year. It is very important in regard to driver training, in regard to maneuverability of the vehicle, in regard to train our drivers to be able to drive responsible. And this can be even combined in an event with an explosive threat. When you are at high speed and cannot control the car, it makes it even worse. So from the priority to avoid accidents, because they are the main killer, is actually a quite high priority. And I think we can put this priority higher than the highest level of protection against blast. But still, the main threat types that we see, small arms for sure, mines in different types, not only anti-personnel mines, also anti-vehicle mines, and IEDs. And I see this is for sure wrong. It is 5 to 20 kilograms here. That's what we face. Thank you very much. And now we have time for some questions.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Alex. That's been amazing and an excellent presentation. Just a couple of key points that I've picked up on from my experience is, excuse me, we test, come back a step. Procurement agencies will determine through a risk matrix and an assessment of their operations a particular level of protective capability. And from take an example, side blast, it might be 2 meters, 3 meters, 4 meters side blast protection. The important thing, obviously, to remember is those who wish to do us harm don't think about what your VPAM or PAS certificate might be and then say, oh, your vehicle is certified to 3 meters, so I won't place the explosive device at 2 meters. It's not going to happen. And so there is always a balance between understanding the mission scenario, the protective capability, how you're going to build the vehicle, the capabilities and designs of the manufacturers that procurement agencies are using, and then managing that risk in the field through all the other security aspects, the layers of the security onion, as we used to call along the way. The other point is that you raised about what we used to call sticky bombs, magnetically attached small devices. And maybe afterwards in the forum we could discuss this further, the effect of blast of a small device of maybe only 300 grams of explosive against the soft skin of the vehicle, and it's a blast effect then into the armour plate inside, for example, a door panel. And I was fortunate enough to do some trials with Defence Science and Technology Organisation and Defence in Australia, and we trialled this issue in a number of places along the of a vehicle and found some very interesting results that effectively said even a small amount of explosive against the the soft skin actually had a significantly larger impact upon the armoured steel itself, and it wasn't necessarily what we thought proportionally. So that's something that we can discuss later on. All right, are there any questions? No? All right, well again, Alex will be here for the next 2 days. I'm going to be grabbing him for lots of questions too, because it's a significant issue along the way. So I want to thank you, Alex, for your presentation. Please join me in thanking him again. So well done. And we'll take a short break for about 10 minutes. The coffee machine has been refilled, so that's always good news. We'll see you back in about 10 minutes. Thank you.